Hi, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of Return of the Hack, the podcast from E92 Plus. I'm your host, Neil Langridge. I'm the Marketing Alliances Director, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Dirk Schrader from Netwrix. Hi, Dirk. Good to
Hi,
see you.
hi, Neil. Hi, everybody. Good to see
Smashing.
you as well.
Well, thanks very much for joining us. So the topic that we want to cover today is around resilience, and we're gonna head off in a few different angles around cyber and business resilience and data and all sorts of angles. But if just to start, Doug, if you can kind of give a little bit background about yourself and what you do at Netwrix.
I will do. Probably the easiest part for today. As you said, my name is Dirk Schrader. I'm with Netwrix as the VP of Security Research. In a secondary role, I'm also the CISO for the EMEA arena of our operations. So what does it mean? What do I do? I'm more focused on sort of these background issues of how do we evolve cybersecurity? How do we put out things that can help achieve our common goal, which is to be, in the sense of what we're talking about today, more resilient against attacks? How can we sort of weather through attacks without diminishing our operations too much? So, in essence, what we're doing is researching about how can we make sure that we are not easily tipped off.
Yeah, perfect. So I mean, we've seen the term resilience a lot it being used a lot more. I've started seeing kind of more vendors, more customers talk about it. It's become more of a topic area. But kind of, I suppose a good place to start is how do you define resilience? What does that mean for an organisation to be
Yeah,
cyber resilient?
it's definitely a good start because there is a usual sort of marketing buzz around that. Yeah, so everybody claims about resilience and stuff like. So clearing the fog about it is certainly good start. The best definition I have seen so far is one that has been coined by scholars of the University of Stockholm. What they say about cyber resilience is that it is an entity's, and I have to read it so not to make a mistake, an entity's ability to continuously deliver its intended outcome despite adverse cyber events. Brief, short, and there is a lot in there that is ready to digest, to be honest, where we
Yeah.
can take it apart. So we're talking about intended outcome, which is taking the whole discussion of cybersecurity into that business world of, okay, what is our intended outcome as a business? What do we make? What do we produce? What is our value add we deliver? The intended outcome. How can we continuously deliver that? What does it mean to do that continuously? Even if it is diminished or sort of kind of lowered to a sense due to a adverse cyber event. And what is the meaning of an adverse cyber event? Does it have to be an attack? Can it be an outage? Can it be something related to the old term, which is often sort of the misconception behind cyber resilience, talking about business continuity, disaster recovery? Both are an element of cyber resilience, but in old days, business continuity and disaster recovery was more like how can we continue to do the same thing as we have done before, even if a server goes down or something like that? How do we operate if a server is failing? How do we operate if a data center is failing? These are the things. Now we're talking about the process side of things, which is probably the interesting part about cyber resilience, as we're not only talking technically anymore, but we're talking about holistically in that sense.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good thing that we're, I suppose, in terms of that step forward, increasingly tying cybersecurity not just into how a business operates and how it's kind of pretty much fundamental to so many organizations in terms of, that digital journey, but actually in terms of business outcomes as well. Because,
Yeah,
it's very easy to forget that, kind of cybersecurity shouldn't just be a tick box, it's a compliance, it's another cost and budget line, it's something to keep the IT guys and girls busy with, it is all about, it is more than just insurance. It's about helping sure that we're delivering positive business outcomes.
And that's one of the things that, if we're talking about sort of the what makes an organization cyber, what is the strategy behind it? These kind of idea of what is in it for me, not only from a technical point of view, from an IT security standpoint, but also from a business unit owner or from a department head side of things. If we take this as the notion or the idea of cyber resilience is there to really explain why IT security in its basics, basic cyber hygiene, whatever the kind of keyword you want to use there, is now being taken as an element of being the business enabler. If I'm talking to you about cyber resilience, dear business unit owner, dear department head, I'm talking to you on in your terms, in your language about, hey, what do you do? How do you organize yourself to create value add? What is the role digital assets are playing for that? And what do you do if you don't have them?
Yeah.
You know?
So, and I suppose, therefore, that the kind of the next kind of follow on from that is what does make an organisation cyber resilient? Because, as you say, there's many different kind of components and elements there,
Yeah.
and it's certainly not going to be the same thing for every organisation. So, I suppose that comes back to that point of every organisation needs to define that for themselves. But
Yeah.
what are the key? Are there kind of common elements where you would say organisations need to make sure they're addressing those parts to make sure that they are as resilient as possible?
That takes me down back to the definition. I mean, so what is your intended outcome? So you're, as a company, as an as an entity, as the definition calls it, you're creating a value add. You have an idea of this is why we do it. This is what we want to deliver.
Yeah.
Whether it's a product, whether it's a service, doesn't matter. But then you have your processes for that, your business processes that help you generate that intended outcome. And that's your starting point. You look at your processes, you look at these maybe auxiliary processes, you look at the crucial ones for sure, and then you decide, okay, these are the crucial ones for me. They deliver the majority of my intended outcome. And then you check, okay, what are the digital assets involved? Here is sort of the pro tip is if you have more than one critical process delivering crucial value add to your business, and you have digital assets that play a role in each of these processes, then you have a critical asset.
Yep.
So if you have a visibility into your process map, so to speak, you can check in and say, okay, now these digital assets play a role in the process. What happens if one or two or how many or whatever elements of these process chains are hampered by an adverse cyber event? And what do I do instead? If one asset doesn't work anymore, if it's diminished, if it's not available, how do I replace that? How do I operate while it is not available? Because from the moment being unavailable to the moment being restored in its functionality, what do? Right? You can't do nothing. Yeah? You have to have alternatives. And once you are sort of in that visibility stage of saying, okay, now I have a business process map. I have that business process map being sort of aligned to my digital asset map, to the workflows behind it, to talking technical terms, how they communicate to each other, what are the ports and services that are used in these kind of processes. So it can be very detailed. And the next thing you do is, in order to stay there, is you monitor for changes.
Yeah.
Here's one additional element of misconception about cyber resilience. You're not just monitoring for changes on the technical level. Yeah? New server, new port, whatever. File integrity monitoring, change management. You're not just checking for new accounts or something like that. You're also checking for the evolution in your business processes. If a change in the process, in the way you generate your value add, has an impact on digital assets, maybe disconnecting a digital asset from that process where the digital asset becomes less relevant, or adding a new digital asset, that's the part you need to keep an eye on as well. Because if you do that, if you have this close connection between how you evolve as a business and how you use digital assets for that evolution, you can stay cyber resilient because you have an oversight on where do you rely upon. Yeah?
Yeah. And I think that there's obviously been a lot of examples recently from a kind of a global perspective of organisations who have had to fundamentally change their processes. They've had people in the office and now they're working remotely, and that's changed the digital assets or
Yes.
the devices that they're using. When they've obviously, a lot of organisations have accelerated their migration to the cloud. That's fundamentally changed their workloads and their infrastructure. So that's been a time when organisations have had to readdress all of this, but haven't necessarily always readapted their cybersecurity processes to match accordingly.
That's the point here. When this, on the one hand side, we see the disconnect of we want to be digitalized as an entity, as a company. We want to do things in a smarter way, more versatile. We want to reap the benefits of the data we generate. All this kind of statements we hear about digitalization overall. But on the other hand, when we look at cybersecurity, we still tend to see this 0-1 approach. Either we are perfectly secure or we are not secure at all. This is the idea of having a computerized environment means that if I can always jump from 0 to 1, from 1 to 0, so it's either protected or it's not protected. There is no gray area. There is no idea of, hey, a process is never perfect. You always have the chance to improve. You always have a risk to fail. And that's the one element that is also coming in with cyber resilience as a notion or as a topic to discuss, is it takes the whole view of cybersecurity away from 0 and 1 to a risk management situation where you are saying, okay, now with the close connection of business processes and digital assets, we need to handle cybersecurity in a risk management approach. It's not, and it will never be perfect. And in that sense, if you are looking at cyber resilience, it is the manifestation of risk management for IT security.
So kind of bearing that in mind, I suppose has that also kind of coincided with a bit of an evolution in terms of how we approach cybersecurity as well? Because you talk about resilience, and we talk about kind of risk management and acceptance of that move to kind of when, not if, and organisations increasingly making sure that they are planning not just to protect forever and defend and line up the walls at the barricades, but that business resilience has to work on the basis of making sure that there is a plan for when things go wrong, and the acceptance that not necessarily a catastrophic data breach, but there will be vulnerabilities that potentially could be exploited, be they device, application, user, and that what an organisation does and how it adapts to that and responds.
It is. I mean, you mentioned that business resilience, organizational resilience, personal resilience. If you take the two things, if I want to be as an organization, if I want to be cyber resilient, I'm very much dependent not exclusively, but I'm also dependent on the cyber resilience of my individuals, of my employees, of
Yeah.
how they treat cybersecurity. And there's that element of risk, risk appetite, risk adverseness. I'm not sure if that's the proper English word. Sorry, my German heritage here. The thing I'm talking about is one element of being resilient is to empower my staff to operate within certain guardrails, to be flexible in that, to have their freedom of operations, to fulfill their day-to-day tasks to deliver that outcome. But on the other hand, to make sure that, and I have to, probably it's better to explain it from the opposite point of view, from the negative point of view. If I do treat my employees as the weakest link in my cybersecurity architecture, they will perfectly act as the weakest link. Yeah,
Yeah.
we tell them, okay, you're not allowed to click on this one. You're not allowed to click on that one. We have all the cybersecurity measures in place to prevent harmful things coming to you. We have your notifications in your email that this is an external one and stuff like that. So basically, indirectly, we're telling them it's not your responsibility.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, if I'm talking about resilience, if I'm talking about personal resilience, individual resilience, organizational and cyber resilience, it doesn't make sense to do that. It is helpful to empower, enable my staff to say, okay, you should ask yourself whether this is harmful or not. We will help you with awareness training that fits to your needs, not these sort of standard things
Yeah.
where we are showing awareness training videos recorded in that nice settings, talking about some sort of insurance company doing email phishing campaigns as a trial or as a simulation. And we show these videos to a shop floor worker in the production environment where they are not feeling sort of seen. What
Yeah.
does this have to do with me? Question. And if we are then going into the aspect of, okay, now we have established this sort of personal cyber resilience by helping the staff we have to understand the risk situation according to their job profiles, and making sure that they understand what it means that from an operational perspective, what a downtime means in terms of how do we handle it differently, what do we do else, and saying, okay, we try as best as much to help you not to fall victim, but the best defense is your own activity and your own, let's say, or your own sixth sense to it. Huh? And we help you develop this sixth sense. On the other hand,
Yeah.
if we go into organizational resilience, which is maybe a little bit of a bigger thing than cyber resilience. Organizational resilience is being able to respond to changes in regulations, being able to respond to changes in the business environment as such. What is happening to me if there is a new player on the market, if the economy's situation is changing and stuff like that. So the connect here is probably about regulation and in the sense as well.
Yeah, and I think it does kind of potentially have an impact. You imagine on a lot of the people, it kind of whether they work in cybersecurity or not, that we do spend a lot of time talking about how all of our employees are the weakest link, and the highest percentage of breaches are because human error, and that's a marketing message. But you would imagine it does begin to have an impact. And we do always think of individuals as being just the victims of technology, if you like, rather than necessarily kind of building them more into the business process and how that intertwines with them using technology as part of their role, whether it's cybersecurity or otherwise.
Yeah. The reason for me always being sort of in contradiction to treating employees as the weakest link is that's founded in a story I've learned about a couple of years ago, which is the story of a test that was done with the Munich taxi drivers.
Right.
So they were half of the taxi drivers got standard taxis. The other half got taxis that had, by that time, newest technology, anti-blocking systems, ABS.
Yeah.
And the idea was to measure how does that affect over time the number of accidents happening.
Right.
And the matter of fact was, it doesn't change.
Right.
Those drivers, knowing that they had ABS in their cars, would just be a little bit more risky in their behavior.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So this.
Yeah, reduce their braking distance. Yeah.
Yes. And in essence, and if you transpose that to our situation, yes, we do have AV, we do have security checks for links coming in with sandboxes where we can explode things and stuff like that. Still, all the evasion technologies will lead us to have something in front of an employee. And if we tell them that they are not responsible for the risk by saying that you are the weakest link, they will act in that way. As I mentioned, they will take the risk because they've been told that everything else is already done and they are not responsible for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is quite a different kind of mindset because we're seeing such an increasing large number of attacks, whether it's kind of the kind of business email compromise, the straight up fraud, and even the lessons being taken from from something as obscure as very large but unrelated like romance scams, and the same techniques then being applied to attack organizations. The whole concept around social engineering is there a bit of a fundamental way that we need to kind of readdress how we do educate people and embed them within a business process to make them kind of more resilient in a very different way than the way at the moment. As you say, they kind of just they need to do their job, they need to look out for some stuff, but they just assume if it's technical then it's not me. Is that, I suppose, is that the fundamental element of where we're going wrong, and it needs to be much more embedded in a different way?
Yes, it is. I mean, if Roman scam, these phishing attacks, smishing attacks, where you scratch your head and does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the most important question. This is the question I want my employees from a cybersecurity perspective asking themselves. If you get something, business email fraud or business executive, the BEC, what's the term? Yeah. So someone claiming to be the CEO and you are supposed to transfer funds from one side to the other outside of all the processes because there is an urgency to it, whatever. Does that make sense? I've never talked to my CEO. I've never been asked by my CEO to do something like that. Why should I do it now? And this is sort of the idea of coming back to this sort of senses thing, the sixth sense of does it feel right? And we've always taken away this feel right decision and being discriminative and allowing an employee to be discriminative about something. we've taken it away from them by saying, okay, we have all the tools and sophisticated, bright, shiny objects around it so that you don't have to take that decision. Mark, and we're at that point with cyber resilience that we should reverse that one. We should get our employees back into the game by saying, okay, come back to your senses, and we help you to develop that sixth sense for cyber resilience on a personal level, so that we can improve our own thing. I mean, yes, identity, that's the sort of notion we have heard in the last 3-4 years. Identity is the new sort of firewall, the new barrier. And if we're talking about identities, there is always a human being, most of the time, behind that, someone who is organizing these identities. And we need to make sure that we take it back to that sort of idea of we all have our responsibilities in that real sense for cybersecurity.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of it, this is going to kind of come down to kind of the cybersecurity culture that we're all kind of growing and developed, and and then the kind of the technological strategy needs to very much follow up afterwards. Once we've defined that and everybody's role. So I suppose it's an interesting question of, therefore, how much do we need to expect our staff to understand about cybersecurity? I think it's fair to say, as someone who's obviously, I've worked in cybersecurity for over 15 years, but obviously not in a technical sense. So while I might have a good grasp, I definitely don't understand all the ones and zeros and how that works. So if we're expecting normal staff, so are we? I think as a cybersecurity industry, we can do a different job. But I suppose kind of how much should we expect people to understand? I suppose, is there a different way that we need to be able to talk about it so people can take on this sense of personal responsibility without thinking, all of a sudden, I now need to know how kind of firewalls and privileged account access management works. It's talking about it in different ways so people can embrace that responsibility, but without being scared off by an expectation of having to understand how technology works in a completely different way.
I mean, that's the point. I mean, it's an overused sort of comparison. If we look at modern cars, if you open up the hood, do you understand what you see there? No.
No, I have opened up the hood on my car and I looked at the engine. I went, "That's terrific," and I put the hood down, and I'm not going to look at it again.
That's the point. So, most of the time, folks are not afraid of using a car because of the regulations in place and the idea of saying, okay, expect the unexpected. Expect someone to not follow the rules. Expect someone to make a mistake. And have your own responsibility in terms of how do you handle the stuff you have at hand. If I'm going in and make cybersecurity and IT as cryptic as we have done before, talking about high tech in the sense of having cryptic terms on cyber criminal groups, changing the names all the time, having always these sort of different aspects to it, we're making it more complex and more complicated than it should be. So, in essence, if we look at the way people are exploited, if we look at this and take these examples and do comparisons to other aspects of life, we will achieve much more with our employees, because then they understand that it's not about being hacked with some nerd hammering on the keyboard, writing some code out of nowhere. It's more and more and more and it basically has been before, exploiting human vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And therefore, if we are focused on that one, if we're focused on human vulnerabilities, people following a link, people clicking on something, people using a website that seems to be fishy, and we train them about this is too good to be true,
Yeah.
then we are back in the game of having the employees at our side and not on the distant end of the telephone line asking for help because they have been phished.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that organisations potentially could take a lead because I think that complexity and that fear and that arguably disengagement from that conversation we see in our personal lives around technology, where people do fall for things in a bad way and they can kind of find it kind of overwhelming a little bit. I suppose there's an opportunity for organisations to change that narrative and communicate them in a way where they're coming from a more trusted source.
Yeah.
I'm always been a firm believer that having a positive and open and transparent cybersecurity culture at work can absolutely benefit people's employees. There's a value that an organisation can give that
Yeah.
they can take home into their personal lives. Because
Yeah.
let's face it, all these challenges that we're talking about now apply to us when we're at work on our laptop, but they also apply when we're
Yes.
sitting on social media on our sofa watching the telly as well,
Yeah.
clicking on something we definitely shouldn't be clicking on.
Yes. It is. It is. I mean, these coming back to the example of a smishing attack. Yeah? It's not necessarily affecting us as an organization when an employee is subject to a smishing attack. It most of the time affects them personally.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah? So if we are there as teaming up and helping them to understand what is the danger of a smishing attack by explaining the tactics behind it, by coming back to that notion, sort of fostering these six senses, we are helping ourselves as well. And
yeah,
the other part of enabling, empowering is put this I mean, we have all seen the policies out there. Yeah, cybersecurity is our common responsibility and stuff like that. If I look into the job descriptions, if I'm looking into the job descriptions of an accountant, there's nothing of cybersecurity mentioned in there. Yeah?
no,
In essence, if I am paying an accountant, exaggerating a little bit, if I'm paying an accountant to process invoices, and maybe I'm even incentivizing that person of processing invoices because I can take these sort of early payment deductions and all this kind of things. What am I fostering here? Yeah?
yeah,
They will look at the invoice and say, okay, there's an invoice I'm paid by for processing the invoice. I'm not asking myself whether this is a genuine, a valid invoice. I'm opening the PDF, I'm opening the link, here we go.
yeah, yeah. And I suppose therefore, kind of, does that mean that as a cybersecurity industry, we just need to get better at storytelling, at narratives, at being able to do that, and also
Yep.
therefore find a place further up the table that we can have this conversation, because this isn't going to get fixed by the cyber team, and it's definitely not even going to get fixed by the IT team. It's going to
No.
get fixed at the higher level, because these things are always top down. We know this, so I suppose how can we build a narrative that starts getting this taken seriously, and a change is being driven from the very top at a more strategic level, because clearly just having more cyber attacks and data breaches and vulnerabilities exploited, that's not doing it, because we keep getting that, and it isn't fundamentally changing, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, that's my hope in talking about the senior management, the C levels, the boards, and stuff like
Yep.
that. If they look at the regulations, for example, now Cyber Resilience Act here in the EU, DORA, whatever it is, the term cyber resilience more and more comes up in the regulations, in the compliance part and stuff like that, where my hope is that these people in the boards are looking at the term and don't treat it as a technical thing.
Yeah.
If they take it as okay, let's take cyber resilience as the new level, the higher level of risk management in terms of how do IT security risks affect my business, combine these business, map the process with the digital asset as described from a definition point of view, then we will have that situation where they tend to think of it, okay, now part of the business process is my employee. That's the person who's doing that role, who's doing that job, defined in the process.
Yeah. But I think that the biggest challenge, and I agree, we're starting to see that a lot more. I think you're also seeing it in different angles from things like cyber insurance beginning to mandate more around resilience and kind of saying you need to have kind of MDR and stuff like that, and defining things a lot more because you need to have the response. It's not just a protect and defend. The problem is it feels like a lot of those are not encouraging. People say about compliance, it's a kind of you need to do this. It's a telling off. It's a mandating from a. It feels it comes from a more negative place rather than an encouraging place. And is that the problem that we need to change how we drive that narrative, that it's more encouraging and we take people by the hand rather than giving them a shove?
Yeah, well, I mean, how many bad examples do you need to convince someone that it is a better idea to do something about IT security, cyber resilience in the sense, and that's the point. I mean, looking at it from an opposite point of view, risk management is not always about covering each and every risk to the maximum extent. Yeah. Sometimes you're asking yourself, can I accept that risk? And that's also a possible outcome of doing that cyber resilience exercise in your organization by saying, okay, yes, I know it can happen to me. Yes, I do have my backup plans. Yes, I do know that I can go back to even do things completely in the analog way, manually, handwritten notes, stuff like that. So I'm willing to accept that risk for that part of the business process, which is perfectly fine, as long as you have the answer, as long as you maintain your skills to do it the way you have provided the answer. If that's not the case, if you're not maintaining the skills, if there is no one in your power plant who is having the knowledge of how to turn the valves to reduce the pressure in your pipes, then it's a little bit of a difficulty. But
yes,
yeah. That's the other part of cyber resilience. If we take it as a risk management approach, then it's on us as the IT security folks to also accept, yes, it is a potential risk. We have highlighted it, and the business has accepted it as, we can weather through.
Yeah. Yeah, and therefore a plan B as being a positive and not viewed as purely being in a negative. This is what we do when our house is on fire. It's I think having a plan B is a positive thing because it is all about resilience. It's about finding an alternative way and still absolutely delivering, as we kind of back to where we started from, on business outcomes rather than just being an emergency plan in a red folder that we dig out when it all goes wrong.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, the idea of, even on a personal level, if I am here to maintain my household, to keep my central heating up, whatever, what is my plan B? I mean, central heating is the perfect example because as of now, I'm sitting here and my central heating is down. It's broken. Yeah. It's beyond repair. So what's my alternative? Yeah, I have alternatives. I have thought of that and stuff like that. And if you take this to a little bit to a broader extent, and if you think of the that incident to the factory in Norway, which they're doing aluminium, if I'm not mistaken. They have all that kind of melting of aluminium, producing that stuff like that. And then they were heavily impacted by a cyber attack.
Yes. Yeah.
And what I really loved about it, they were open about it. They even streamed their press conferences from their own side of things, talking about what is going on and how they keep themselves afloat in operations to a reduced extent, yes, during the attack. And that was that's what I'd like to see from all other businesses around the world as well. You don't have to be so close about, hey, it happened to us, because it's happened to everyone. Yeah?
Yep.
Even I have been scammed a couple of years back, so that I paid a massive amount of money, massive lower four digits, to a scammer, because of me not being focused enough. I was looking for a something for my kids. It was kind of urgent because their birthday was coming up, and so I was, hey, this is the perfect one. I need to catch that opportunity. In the end, I paid money for nothing.
Right.
Because I was not focused. I was more on different elements and stuff like that. And this sort of urgency, we always put urgency into something. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's needed, yes, but most of the time, have a step back, reduce that pressure, and better think twice.
Yeah.
Old
And make
saying.
sure and give employees the, empower them to be able to do that, and give themselves that that space. Well,
Allow them to say no.
yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, well, I mean, it's been a fascinating discussion. We're just kind of coming up to the top. I suppose one thing I always like to finish on is a good next step, a practical tip. So, from your perspective, this is always going to be a journey. It's, this is something that we can't easily tick. But for organisations looking to start driving, the agenda around cyber resilience, or for a partner looking to talk to their customers around it, kind of what are those kind of first steps, rather than trying to do everything all at once? Where does the best way to start this journey towards a more cyber resilient approach?
I would probably say, like we've discussed it in our session today. First of all, take that definition, talk about it, and then you start by, okay, now as we have understand what we're talking about in terms of cyber resilience, now let's talk about your business processes. Which are the crucial ones? What kind of IT assets do you use for the crucial ones? How are they protected? And then you're basically having your onion layers of resilience. You're expanding every time, and you always fall back of, what's your plan B? How do you do it if this is not available? Yeah, of course we want to make sure that it stays available. That's why we are in there for protecting things, for hardening the infrastructure, for making least privilege approaches to our identities, for backing up our data and stuff like that. Yes, but in the end, these are just measures. From a process point of view, if all goes south, what do? You need to have your plan B, as I said. And the more you talk about this cross-connect between business processes and IT digital or digital assets, the more you think about, okay, how can I make sure that the obvious risks, the situation is sort of adaptive, yeah, and adaptive in the sense of, okay, I have adapted myself to the current threat scenarios. Yeah? Have I employed MFA? because you don't want to be an easy victim. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes, so MFA is in place. Do I anticipate things? Do I have threat intelligence in place? Yes, okay, more or less I do. And if I anticipate also my changes in the business processes, I'm even better off. Final question in terms of, and probably too late to manage these three capabilities I consider as crucial for resilience: adapt, anticipate, absorb. How do I absorb? What do I do as an alternative, as a plan B? Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming back to the question, start with the smallest aspect. What's your crucial business process?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's been brilliant. Thank you very much for your time, Dirk. And I think I think it's always interesting when we have a conversation around cybersecurity. We don't really talk about technology, but because I think the technology that's what comes after and it works. But it's about people and processes first of all. That's always the fundamental
Yeah.
to be able to approach it from the right angle. So very much appreciate your time. Thank you everybody for listening. Don't forget to look out for the next episode. Details will always be in the links on whatever platform you happen to be watching or listening on. But for now, Dirk, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and sorry for my German.
German's perfectly good. You didn't introduce any long words, and your English is definitely better than my German. Smashing. Auf Wiedersehen,
See you.
everybody. Cheerio.
Bye.
Bye.